Okay, sorry for the delay a little bit there. We're having some air conditioner issues, so just trying to get myself all squared away here. So there are two Supreme Court cases that you're responsible for. The final thing in Unit 7. One of the tricky things with Unit 7 is there's like 8 or 9 Supreme Court cases because of Earl Warren and those Supreme Court cases. We have a couple under Richard Nixon. So, being, aware of these is important. But both Supreme Court cases have to do with Richard Nixon just being paranoid. As good of a start as he got off to as president, we saw how his paranoia really, hurt him as time went on a little bit. So now we're going to look at something called the New York Times Company versus Richard Nixon. And the New York Times, for those that don't know, I'm sure most do, that is a newspaper company. And basically, the newspaper company, New York Times, got certain information sent to it, otherwise known as classified information. And it went to this kind of interesting situation because someone in the public had this classified information. So what are they going to do with it? Are they going to just kind of keep it classified, or are they going to print it? Well, it's a newspaper company, so for them to sell, papers, for them to have good information on something, this looked like a good thing for them to, send over. All right, so as you're writing this in your Supreme Court case, the New York Times basically decides, you know what, we're going to print this classified material. Now, the classified material hurt Richard Nixon a little bit politically. Yeah, these are two separate cases. All right, and Nixon pretty much, I'm not going to say forced, but threatened the New York Times that if they printed this story, they would get in a lot of trouble. And of course, this is going to lead me to tell you that there's a movie about this. I just need to get the name. I know I saw it in movie theaters with the wife at one point. It's called The Post. All right, so if you want a movie on this particular situation, you can watch a movie called The Post. Sees Richard Nixon, kind of doing this and forcing them not to print anything. Ultimately, the New York Times Company does decide to print it and essentially gets the information out there. The Supreme Court sided with the New York Times. Okay, it says it's unconstitutional for the president to try and force, a company to not print or print something, and that is because of the First Amendment and freedom of the press. So even the president cannot really do that. All right, Nixon versus the United States really kind of just led to the Watergate scandal coming out in public a little bit. It ruled that executive privilege or withholding info from Congress in public was not legal during criminal investigation. So both major Supreme Court cases dealing with Richard Nixon, both times the Supreme Court decided against the president, which again is another good example of good old checks and balances. Okay, the judicial branch kind of ruled opposite of Nixon at this point in time, and ultimately hurt his presidency, and in some ways, ended his presidency in terms of the last Supreme Court case. All right, so the information is posted there, okay, in the chat if you missed it, but this is the last thing you're responsible for Unit 7. Now, students often think that when Unit 7 ends, the Cold War ends. Not quite. Cold War still definitely goes on for another 15, 20 years. We still got to spend a little bit of time on it. But we're going to stop Unit 7 now and move on to our final unit. I want to just say a couple things before I do that. All right. First and foremost, okay, if you need any information, please go back to Lesson 14. The quizzes is there to help you study for Friday's test. And also there's going to be the PowerPoint slides. I already saw a couple people snooping in my PowerPoint slides earlier today, the Cold War and the 1950s one. So I found that pretty funny. But that's perfect. You guys go back there and use those to help you study. All right. We made the announcement yesterday that our Regents was officially canceled by the state, which is a perfect situation for us. So go check the announcement out. We will have a final exam. Eventually next week, you will vote if you want. We're going to do 50 questions multiple choice for the final exam. But we're going to vote if we want to have a DBQ or a thematic. So start thinking about which one you want to vote for, and we'll do whatever the class wants. We're not going to do both essays like the real Regents exam. All right? And that leads us nicely into Unit 8. So let's get into that. Unit 8 is called the final presidents. I don't really have a crafty name for it, but we kind of go through each of the final presidents and talk about what impact they made on the United States and look at some of the big moments. There's still some very big moments. There's still a few wars. There's still September 11th. It's still a tricky situation for sure. Abigail will be exactly like the midterm. My thought is I'm going to give it to you on a Friday, and then it's going to be, have pretty much the whole weekend to do it. But I might want the multiple choice done on Friday, and then you have the weekend to do the essay. You'll have at least 2 or 3 days to do it. It's like a take-home final. All right? So that we'll talk about a little bit later, but yeah, that's pretty much the situation. And your focus question is written right here in case you need it. The focus question is, how does America try to become an international peacekeeper? Okay, and the first president we're going to look at is going to be Jimmy Carter. So we'll talk about him in a second. You're going to see me getting up from time to time to turn on the AC. It keeps shutting off like after every 5 minutes and we can't figure out how to fix it. This is happening like in all the rooms, so I want to not be too hot. Okay, so we do kind of skip a president. Gerald Ford comes after Nixon. He was, oh my God, I thought we spelled Gerald right. He comes after Richard Nixon. He was the vice president. There's nothing of him ever on the Regents that I've seen. The only thing you can maybe just have to worry about is that he decided to pardon Richard Nixon as opposed to Richard Nixon maybe being sent to jail. Gerald Ford basically said, he had served enough punishment as taken out as president. He doesn't need to go to jail for his, crimes that he committed in office sort of thing. So this was our way of kind of just moving on as a country. But he's not anyone that we need to know for the Regents. But all the presidents after this are definitely on it to some capacity. Jimmy Carter all the way up until Trump. So we want to make sure that we go through each one and know the kind of big moments. Okay. So before we get into anything else, I think it's very important to make sure we're on the same page with something here. This is a map of Europe, Asia, and a part of Africa. Okay. I want to zoom into the center here of this map, okay, to these countries here. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse. So when we zoom in, we see these countries, okay? You have these countries here in the middle. Does anyone know what this area of the world is called? Because it's the mixture of 2 areas. Okay, very good. This is the Middle East. It's part of Northern Africa, Sudan, Egypt, Libya, okay? And a large chunk of what we call Southwest Asia, okay? But we don't know it as Southwest Asia. We know it as the Middle East. Emma, it's good to see you here, but I don't think I have you guys today. I have you guys tomorrow's 6th period, okay, Emma? So you probably have another class right now. All right. So throughout the late 1970s and into 2021, there's going to be some conflicts that develop in the Middle East that the United States is going to be involved with. The biggest ones are going to be in the countries of Iraq and Kuwait. Okay, we'll talk about those countries here if you can see them on the map. But also just some other Middle Eastern countries: Iran, Israel, Syria, Afghanistan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Pakistan, Yemen. There's a few others. But those are some of the ones you're going to see over the next couple of days and weeks, okay? And what happens is in the 1970s and 80s and 90s is there's going to start to be a lot of conflict in this area, sometimes having to do with the United States and sometimes not. Sometimes there's just a situation that we are aware of what's going on, all right? But let's take a look at a situation that's going to develop here between the countries of Egypt and Israel. Egypt is this large country in northern Africa. Israel is a country that was created after World War II, where a lot of Jewish people went to in 1948, a relatively new country. And we'll get into Israel a little bit later, but ultimately Israel is the only country in this area that I believe is democratic. So obviously we're allies with Israel because they have a democratic government like us. All the other countries in the Middle East are usually not democratic at this time. Okay, so please copy this down. From 1976 to 2000, oh boy, I should fix that. Because we are in the year 2021. We try and take on the role of becoming what's known as an international peacekeeper. Okay, we want to try and get countries together that are struggling in the Middle East, and not struggling, but having turmoil with other countries. And we're going to try and take an active role in trying to basically bring peace to these countries. Much different than we did prior to World War II. and World War I, we were completely isolated. We have the opposite approach right now. Okay, the Middle East is having some issues. We want to try and bring a peaceful hand, okay, because we don't want, wars to break out in this area. And also, we know when wars break out in an area, then there's a good chance it could become communist. So this is still all related to the Cold War a little bit. Okay, so let's establish a situation that develops in Egypt and Israel. Now, like every president we go throughout this time, I'll try and point out the good and the bad. Let's look at one of the good things Jimmy Carter does. These are known as the Camp David Accords. These are very typical of coming up on the regions. Do me a favor, please read what's in white, but just copy down what's in yellow as well. Okay, I think it's important to get a little background first before we go over it. Oh, Jimmy Carter's still alive. He's old. He's definitely old. But he's alive and kicking. Definitely give him some credit. Okay. So Israel is a small, I don't even know if you guys could really see it. It's a small country in yellow here. They're a small Jewish country, that was created in 1948, as I mentioned before. We will not, Anicia, but that is obviously a very cool thing. He took a trip to the South Bronx, and I think when he was still president, and spoke to a bunch of the people here, which is really cool. But no, that's not something we will learn about. So what happens out in Israel is going to generally be based off of what's called geopolitics. And what that means is there's a discrepancy of whose land is who, so to speak. So Israel is surrounded by a lot of countries that don't particularly like it as well. A lot of these countries are Arab countries, and they have been historically been getting into some conflicts. Okay, right now, the two countries that don't particularly get along in the Middle East is Israel and Palestine. Okay, I think you guys saw the rockets going off a couple of weeks back. Some pretty tense moments there, all right, between Israel and Palestine, but there's always kind of been an issue, okay? Israel is surrounded by countries that really don't get along with it, but the thing about Israel is it has a very strong military, and it also is backed by the United States because we are both democratic countries. One of the first conflicts that arises in 1978 is between Egypt and Israel over land. So if you guys see my mouse, hopefully, you'll notice just south of the yellow Israel, there's a peninsula. It's called the Sinai Peninsula. Okay? That Sinai Peninsula, Israel claimed to be theirs. Okay? All right. I hate when that happens. If you look just south of Israel, okay, you'll see the country of Egypt. And then at like the top right of Egypt, there's going to be a peninsula. So there's going to be the Red Sea that kind of develops this area that is going to be this peninsula. But just understand, if you can't see it, it's just going to be an area of Egypt that Israel claims should own, and Egypt claims they should own. So there's a geopolitical issue, okay? Being an international peacekeeper, no, it's to the right of Cairo. Okay, you see how Cairo, and then there's water, and then there's that kind of peninsula area, an area surrounded by three sides of water. That's where we're looking. All right. So that particular area there has come under to like some discrepancy. So America, acting as international peacekeeper, is obviously we're allied with Israel. We have no problem with Egypt. You know, like, why don't we say, like, why don't we get these people together, invite them to the United States, and let's have them sit down and talk. Okay, and that's what we do. So there's an area in Washington, D.C. where the president vacations to. It's known as Camp David. So we're going to basically invite Israel leader and Egyptian leaders to a vacation, and while they're on the vacation, to sit and have a peaceful conversation about what to do. Okay, we decide that we will agree between Israel and Egypt that Israel would agree to leave this peninsula if Egypt agrees in return to recognize Israel as an independent nation. Because right now, Egypt says Israel doesn't exist because it should be technically all of Egypt. So they basically make a compromise for land. Our president, Jimmy Carter, has a huge influence in that. And by the time they leave Camp David, okay, if you're looking at the photo back here, one second, I'll come back to it. If you're looking at this photo, this is Jimmy Carter, okay, and the Israeli and Egyptian leaders coming to an agreement. And you kind of see in the middle here, Jimmy Carter, the president, brokering that agreement. All right, so this is a situation where we get some success, okay, in being international peacekeepers. Now, there'll be other situations that happen out in the Middle East where we're not as successful, okay, but this is one of those where we helped avoid a conflict, and that's a good thing. All right. Anyone need more time? Am I good to move on? And I guess I should remember, everything from Unit 8 you don't need to know for your Unit 7 test, obviously. This is just to help get you ready for the final exam. All right, here are your practice regions questions coming up. In the Camp David Accords, 1978, President Jimmy Carter succeeded in what? A lot of threes lately. Providing a foundation for peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. Okay? The Camp David Accords, negotiated during President Jimmy Carter's administration, were an attempt to what? Okay, very good. 4, establish peace in the Middle East. Pretty much any time you see Camp David, we're trying to work out some type of peace deal. All right, let's take a look at a bad thing. Now, Jimmy Carter was a one-term president. At the end of his presidency, there's going to be a huge issue that occurs, kind of similar to Richard Nixon, not where he's going to be impeached, but this issue is just going to cripple the American economy. And this crippling, led him to be ousted before he can have a second term. So please copy down everything in yellow. Last slide for today. Okay, so a huge problem ranging from the years, we'll say 1975 to honestly like around 2010, 2015, we became so dependent on oil. Now, for those that don't know, oil is a natural resource. Was there oil in the United States? Yes, but not enough to basically fuel our country. Okay, So we had to rely on trading with other countries to be successful. Okay, a big conflict we start to get into in the 90s and 2000s was all centered around oil. Okay, if you guys know September 11th or the Iraqi War or the Persian Gulf War, this is all centered around that. Okay, now Jimmy Carter helping out Israel ended up kind of biting us in the butt a little bit because, as I mentioned before, Israel wasn't very well liked by a lot of Middle Eastern countries. Okay, so there was this group of countries basically formed, and they called themselves OPEC. You know how like we have NATO? The Middle Eastern countries have OPEC. Okay, and OPEC was designed to basically be a unification of the Middle Eastern countries. And one of the decisions they decided as a group of Middle Eastern countries is they were going to place an oil embargo on the United States. So that meant we cannot get our oil in the Middle East. Now, 90% of the oil around the world at this time is centered in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, they have a lot of oil. So we tried to have good relationships with them despite having a much different type of culture or government because we wanted to have oil. They knew that and they were mad at us, so they put an oil embargo and a ban on oil and trading. This crushed our economy. And I need to just go back a little bit, all the way back to the 1960s when we created the Great Society program. The Great Society program, we know, led to a lot more spending, okay? So when we led to a lot more spending, it unfortunately led to a little bit of inflation. Okay, the value of the dollar went down. Now we add an oil crisis. This oil crisis crushed our economy. We didn't fall into a depression, but we definitely did very bad in the late 1970s. The biggest thing that came from the oil crisis is obviously you need oil for gas, heat, okay, things along those lines. There were gas shortages. So there used to be limits on the amount of gas you could have. Cars could be seen lining up for hours just to get a little bit of gas. Okay, trying to drive was tough. Are you guys familiar with February break and April break in school? Okay, every February it seems like you have a President's Day break, correct? It's really not a vacation to celebrate any holidays. The truth of the matter is in the 1970s, they used to close the schools for a week because of a gas shortage and oil crisis. So the reason why you're off for February break is because of that oil crisis. They wanted to close the schools down to save on money that they had to spend. Same thing with spring break. Spring break used to just be a few days, okay, for Easter. Now it's like a full week. Why? Right, Abigail, it's just become tradition now, sort of. All right, there's no more oil crisis or gas crisis really anymore, though our gas prices aren't doing so well in the last couple of weeks. But we could easily do without those breaks. There were no breaks before that, but because of this, you have a February break because of this oil crisis, okay? This oil embargo caused a gas shortage in America and a major economic crisis that really tarnished Jimmy Carter's presidency. Jimmy Carter was a president that was like a really nice guy. I would tend to think he was good in like terms of helping out the environment. You know, you saw the Camp David Accords, but like when it came to be tough, he never seemed to take it to the next level. The one you're not writing down, I never seen on the regions, but definitely just tarnished his presidency towards the end, I think. Iran disliked Jimmy Carter so much that they took 52 American hostages in 1979. Some press people that were out in the Middle East, they took them hostage and refused to release them. They were hostages for over a year and a half. Jimmy Carter didn't do anything to get the hostages back. One day after he gets taken out of office, you can't make this up, Iran released the hostages. They were basically toying with us, and a lot of Americans felt like we're not the country you should toy with. Okay, and we kind of did nothing about it. So a lot of people felt he was very weak on foreign policy, especially when some of these countries like Iran, you know, started taking some of our people hostage. Okay, and once he left office, I'll never forget, my dad was explaining to me that like it was the biggest like screw you to Jimmy Carter. Okay, Iran disliked him so much that, you know, once he left, like, okay, you can have your hostages back. All right, and if you're one of those 52 American hostages, it's a real sad situation. All right, so this was Jimmy Carter oversimplified. These are the two major things you'll see on the regions. I think there's a question or two here. And then, yes, correct. So which situation in the 1970s caused the United States to reconsider its dependence on foreign energy sources? Okay, 2. Oil embargo by the OPEC countries that became a huge issue. Now, luckily in 2021, we are what's called energy independent for the most part. We're able to fuel our country without relying on other countries for oil. So that's a good thing. But you'll see how much of a problem oil becomes in the last few weeks of this class, because we have to rely on the Middle East, and they know that, and they hold that as like a bargaining chip the entire time. All right. Before you guys get into the assignment, Thursday, I just want to mention, Thursday, tomorrow is our last, we're going to do another lesson of Unit 8, and then Friday we'll go back and we'll take the Unit 7 test. There'll be no new lesson for Unit 8, but we'll get into Ronald Reagan tomorrow, who has a much different approach, especially when dealing with some of the things that Jimmy Carter didn't do so well with. Today's lesson is very short. I think a lot of you guys will finish pretty early here. There is a Google Doc assignment. You may need to open it with the Google Doc to write on it. So just hit open with at the top and go to Google Docs. Literally a short reading, 4 or 5 questions. That's it. Okay, this is pretty straightforward. I wanted to give you a little bit of an easier day, so if you wanted to go and do a little studying, that's fine too. Tomorrow will be the same thing. It'll be a pretty short reading and a short amount of questions, so you can go back and study too. That's all intentional. All right, I got to take attendance. If there's no further questions, please just hang until 12:37, and then I'll let you know when it's time to go.